Have you ever had your life completely fall apart? Lost a job you loved? Watched a relationship crumble, or faced a crisis that shook your identity to its core? In those darkest moments, it can feel like everything meaningful has been stripped away. But what if I told you that some of history's most influential thinkers discovered that our greatest suffering can actually be the doorway to our deepest meaning? Hey everyone, welcome to a new series where we explore the surprising connections between ancient wisdom and modern psychology. Today we're starting with something that might completely change how you view the challenges in your own life. 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli experienced one of the most dramatic falls from grace in history. As a respected diplomat in Renaissance Florence, he had wealth, status, and meaningful work. Then suddenly, everything was taken from him. When the government was overthrown, Machiavelli was arrested, brutally tortured, and exiled from the city he loved. He lost his career, his social position, and his sense of purpose. Alone and broken, he faced the ultimate question: how do you find meaning when everything you valued is gone? Fast forward to the 20th century, and a young psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl faced an even more extreme version of this question. As a Jewish doctor in Nazi-occupied Austria, he was sent to multiple concentration camps, including Auschwitz. He lost his parents, his pregnant wife, and nearly everything that defined his identity. Surrounded by unimaginable suffering and stripped of all dignity, Frankl confronted the most profound challenge possible: how to find meaning in the face of senseless cruelty and loss. What's absolutely fascinating is that despite being separated by almost 500 years, both men came to strikingly similar conclusions about how humans can transform suffering into meaning. And their insights aren't just philosophical ideas, they're practical strategies for resilience that you can apply in your own life. Whether you're facing a career setback, personal loss, or any situation where you feel like life has pulled the rug out from under you. Let's start with Machiavelli's story, because it contains a surprising twist that most people don't know. We usually think of Machiavelli as this cold, calculating political advisor who wrote The Prince, often considered the ultimate guide to ruthless power politics. But that's missing the bigger picture of who he really was and the incredible transformation he underwent through his suffering. Before his fall from power, Machiavelli was a dedicated civil servant who deeply believed in the Florentine Republic. His identity was completely wrapped up in his role as a diplomat. When he was suddenly imprisoned, tortured, and then exiled to a small farm outside the city, he didn't just lose his job, he lost his entire sense of purpose and meaning. In letters to his friend Francesco Vittori, Machiavelli described his depression and sense of uselessness. He wrote about how he would wake up before dawn, catch birds in the forest, and then spend his afternoons at a local tavern playing cards with the innkeeper, a butcher, and 2 bakers. A far cry from his former life, discussing politics with Florence's elite. "I have sunk so low," he wrote, "that everyone disregards me." This is the critical moment in Machiavelli's story, the point where he could have been consumed by bitterness and despair. Instead, he made a remarkable choice that would not only transform his own life, but influence political thinking for centuries to come. In the evening, after his day of menial activities, Machiavelli would return home, change into formal robes, and enter his study. There he would commune with the great minds of history through their books, engaging in what he called conversations with the ancients. In this space, he found a new kind of meaning, not through external validation or position, but through intellectual engagement and creation. It was during this period of exile and apparent failure that Machiavelli wrote The Prince, along with other works that would establish him as one of the founding fathers of modern political science. What looked like the end of his meaningful life became the beginning of a much greater contribution that continues to impact our world today. Now, let's jump to Viktor Frankl in the Nazi concentration camps. In his memoir, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl described how he observed that in those extreme conditions, it wasn't necessarily the physically strongest who survived. Rather, it was those who found some meaning in their suffering, those who maintained a reason to live despite unimaginable hardship. Frankl wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." This insight became the foundation of his psychological approach called logotherapy, centered on the belief that the primary motivational force in humans is not pleasure or power, but the search for meaning. Like Machiavelli, Frankl's greatest contribution emerged directly from his suffering. His experience in the camps transformed his theoretical ideas into lived wisdom that has helped millions of people find meaning in their own struggles. Man's Search for Meaning has sold over 16 million copies and been named one of the most influential books of all time. So what exactly did these two men, separated by centuries but united by the experience of extreme adversity, discover about finding meaning in suffering? And more importantly, how can we apply their insights to our own lives? The first key insight they shared was this: meaning isn't something you find externally. It's something you create through how you respond to your circumstances. Both men faced situations where everything external was taken from them, yet both discovered that their internal freedom to choose their response could not be taken away. Frankl put it beautifully when he wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." This isn't just inspirational talk. It's a profound psychological insight about how meaning works. Machiavelli demonstrated this same principle when he chose to transform his exile into a period of deep reflection and creation. He wrote to his friend, "When evening comes, I return home and enter my study. I enter the ancient courts of the ancients and am welcomed by them. And there I taste the food that alone is mine, and for which I was born." He didn't wait for circumstances to improve. He created meaning within the circumstances he had. I remember working with a woman who had built her entire identity around her career as a corporate executive. When she was unexpectedly let go during a company restructuring, her sense of self-worth collapsed completely. For months, she fell into depression, seeing herself solely as a victim of unfair circumstances. The turning point came when she realized she could choose her response to this situation. Rather than continuing to see herself as a passive victim, she began exploring other facets of her identity and capabilities. She started volunteering with a nonprofit, then found that she had skills and perspectives that could help smaller organizations grow. Eventually, she built a consulting practice that became more fulfilling than her corporate role had ever been. This wasn't just making the best of a bad situation. It was a fundamental shift in how she related to adversity. Like Machiavelli and Frankl, she discovered that meaning isn't dictated by external circumstances, but created through our response to them. The second major insight both men shared was that suffering becomes more bearable when we see it as meaningful rather than senseless. Both Machiavelli and Frankl found ways to frame their suffering as serving a greater purpose, which dramatically altered their experience of that suffering. Frankl observed in the camps that suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice. He noted that people could endure almost unimaginable hardship if they believed it served some larger purpose or protected something they valued. Machiavelli similarly transformed his suffering by seeing it as the necessary condition for creating his greatest work. He came to view his exile not as a meaningless punishment, but as the crucible that allowed him to develop insights that would have been impossible from within the government. He wrote that his exile gave him a perspective that those still in power could never have: the ability to see political systems from both the inside and outside. I worked with a man who suffered a spinal cord injury in an accident that left him paralyzed from the waist down. The first year after his injury, he was consumed by anger and despair, seeing his situation as nothing but senseless tragedy. The transformation began when he started mentoring newly injured patients at the rehabilitation center. By helping others navigate the emotional and practical challenges he had faced, his own suffering took on new meaning. It became the source of wisdom and empathy that allowed him to reach people in ways no able-bodied person could. As he told me, "I wouldn't choose this injury, but I can choose to make it meaningful by using it to help others." This shift in perspective didn't eliminate his difficulties, but it transformed his relationship to them. The third crucial insight both Machiavelli and Frankl discovered is that adversity often reveals depths of meaning that prosperity conceals. Both men found that their moments of greatest suffering stripped away superficial concerns and brought them face to face with what truly mattered. For Frankl, the concentration camps reduced life to its barest essence. In that extreme environment, he observed that small moments of beauty, connection, or dignity took on enormous significance. He described how a sunset glimpsed through barbed wire or an act of kindness from a fellow prisoner could provide profound meaning even amidst horror. Machiavelli similarly found that his exile stripped away the distractions of politics and social position, allowing him to focus on what he truly valued: the life of the mind and the creation of work that would outlast him. What initially seemed like a punishment became the condition for his greatest achievement. I remember working with a successful entrepreneur who had built her business with single-minded focus, often at the expense of personal relationships and well-being. When the business failed during an economic downturn, she initially saw it as nothing but catastrophic loss. Yet as she rebuilt her life, she described the failure as the worst thing that ever happened to me. The crisis had forced her to confront questions about what truly mattered to her, beyond achievement and status. She rebuilt her career with a completely different set of priorities, integrating work with meaningful relationships, personal health, and community involvement. Like Machiavelli and Frankl, she discovered that adversity had revealed layers of meaning that success had obscured. So how can we apply these insights to our own lives? How do we actually practice this transformation of suffering into meaning when we're in the middle of difficult circumstances? The first step is to shift from asking, "Why is this happening to me?" to "What is this asking of me?" When we're suffering, our natural reaction is often to question why we're being subjected to pain or difficulty. Both Machiavelli and Frankl suggest a different question, not about the cause of our suffering, but about our response to it. When Machiavelli was exiled, he could have spent years questioning why he had been betrayed by the political system he served. Instead, he asked himself what his new circumstances made possible that hadn't been before. The answer was a depth of reflection and writing that his busy diplomatic career had never allowed. Similarly, Frankl didn't focus on why he was in the concentration camps, a question with obvious but unhelpful answers. Instead, he asked what his circumstances required of him, how he could maintain his dignity, help fellow prisoners, and preserve the insights he was gaining for future use in his psychiatric work. This shift from why to what now is something we can practice in any difficult situation. When you lose a job, rather than just asking why it happened, ask what it's calling you to develop or discover. When a relationship ends, beyond questioning why it failed, ask what growth it's now requiring of you. The second practical strategy is to connect your suffering to something larger than yourself. Both Machiavelli and Frankl found meaning by linking their personal struggles to contributions that extended beyond their individual lives. For Frankl, even in the camps, this meant preserving psychological insights that could help others in the future. He would often mentally compose lectures he would give after the war about what he was learning about human resilience. This connected his immediate suffering to a future benefit for others. Machiavelli similarly transformed his exile by connecting it to the broader intellectual tradition he admired. In his letters, he describes his writing not just as personal expression, but as participation in the great conversation of political thought that stretched back to ancient times and would continue long after him. We can practice this by asking how our current challenges might help us contribute to others. Could the wisdom gained from your divorce help you support friends going through similar transitions? Might the resilience developed through health challenges enable you to show others what's possible? Finding ways that your suffering might benefit others doesn't erase the pain, but it can infuse it with purpose. The third strategy is to use adversity as an opportunity for self-discovery. Both Machiavelli and Frankl found that their darkest moments revealed strengths, values, and capacities they might never have discovered otherwise. Frankl observed that the extreme conditions of the camps revealed the full range of human potential, both the depths of cruelty and the heights of compassion and dignity. On a personal level, he discovered inner resources he hadn't known he possessed. Machiavelli, forced out of his practical political role, discovered his gift for political theory and writing. What began as a way to cope with isolation became the revelation of his greatest talents. We can practice this by approaching our difficulties with curiosity rather than just resistance. What might this challenge reveal about you that you didn't know before? What strengths are developing through this struggle? What values are becoming clearer as less important concerns fall away? The fourth strategy both men exemplify is maintaining agency, even in severely constrained circumstances. Both Frankl and Machiavelli were powerless to change their external situations, but both found ways to exercise choice within those constraints. Frankl described how prisoners who maintained small daily choices, how to respond to a guard, whether to share a crust of bread with someone else, how to spend a rare, free moment, preserved their sense of humanity and meaning. These weren't grand choices, but they were expressions of inner freedom that no one could take away. Machiavelli similarly exercised choice within the constraints of his exile. He couldn't return to Florence or his government position, but he could choose how to structure his days, what to read, and most importantly, what to write. These choices became the foundation of his new identity and purpose. We can practice this by identifying the choices available to us, even in highly constrained situations. When facing a health challenge, you may not choose the treatment options, but you can choose how to communicate with doctors, how to use your good days, and how you frame the experience for yourself. In job loss, you can't control the market, but you can choose how to structure your days, what skills to develop, and how to engage with your network. The final strategy both men demonstrate is finding meaning through creative work. Both Machiavelli and Frankl transformed their suffering into written works that not only helped them personally, but became lasting contributions. Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, written shortly after his liberation from the camps, became one of the most influential psychology texts ever published. What began as his way of processing trauma became a gift to millions of readers seeking meaning in their own struggles. Similarly, Machiavelli's works written during exile, not just The Prince, but also his discourses on Livy and other writings, established him as one of the founders of modern political thought. His creative response to adversity produced insights that continue to influence how we understand politics 5 centuries later. While not everyone will write books, we all have the capacity to respond creatively to our challenges. This might mean starting a blog to share insights from your experience, creating art that expresses difficult emotions, building a community group to address needs you've identified, or developing innovative approaches to problems you've faced. Creative response to suffering doesn't eliminate the pain, but it transforms you from passive victim to active creator, which fundamentally changes your relationship to adversity. So what can we learn from these two great thinkers who, despite being separated by centuries, discovered such similar truths about suffering and meaning? Perhaps the most important lesson is that meaning isn't something we find in perfect circumstances, but something we create through how we respond to all circumstances, especially the difficult ones. This doesn't mean suffering is good or that we should seek it out. Both Machiavelli and Frankl would have preferred to avoid their respective ordeals, but both discovered that when suffering does come, as it inevitably does in every life, it can become the soil for our deepest growth and most meaningful contributions. For your own development, start noticing how you respond to difficulties. Do you get caught in questions about why something is happening, or can you shift to asking what it's calling forth from you? Can you identify small choices available even in constrained circumstances? Are there ways your current challenges might eventually benefit others, or reveal aspects of yourself you haven't yet discovered? These questions don't make hardship disappear, but they can transform your relationship to it, just as they did for Machiavelli in his exile and Frankl in the concentration camps. By choosing to create meaning even in our darkest moments, we tap into a form of freedom and resilience that no external circumstance can take away. Next time, we'll explore another fascinating connection between Renaissance wisdom and modern psychology, as we look at how Machiavelli's insights anticipate Martin Seligman's groundbreaking research on learned helplessness and learned optimism. If you found this valuable, hit subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you experienced this transformation of suffering into meaning in your own life? What strategies helped you find purpose during difficult times? Let me know below. This information is shared to help you build resilience and find meaning in life's challenges. If you're experiencing severe depression or trauma, please also seek support from mental health professionals in addition to applying these philosophical insights. Have you ever wondered why some people shatter when faced with disaster, while others somehow transform their worst moments into their greatest strengths? Why do some people get knocked down by life and stay down, while others rise from the ashes, more powerful than before? The answer might be found in an unlikely connection between a 16th century political philosopher and modern psychology. Imagine losing everything overnight. Your career, your reputation, your freedom, all gone in an instant. That's exactly what happened to Niccolò Machiavelli in 1512. For 14 years, he'd been a rising star in the Florentine government, handling diplomatic missions across Europe and advising the highest levels of leadership. Then, in a sudden political upheaval, the powerful Medici family returned to Florence. The Republic fell, and Machiavelli found himself not just unemployed, but arrested, tortured, and eventually exiled from the city he had dedicated his life to serving. Talk about a fall from grace. One day he's shaping international relations and advising rulers. The next, he's a broken man living in poverty on a small farm outside the city, watching helplessly as his enemies take control. For most people, this would be the end of the story, a tragedy with no redemption in sight. But that's not what happened. Instead, During this painful exile, Machiavelli wrote what would become one of the most influential political works in history, The Prince, a book still studied and debated more than 500 years later. How did he manage this remarkable transformation from disgraced politician to immortal thinker? And what can his story teach us about overcoming our own setbacks? To understand this, we need to fast forward about 450 years to the laboratories of psychologist Martin Seligman. In the 1960s, Seligman was conducting experiments that would revolutionize our understanding of how humans respond to adversity. He discovered what he called learned helplessness, a psychological state where people who have faced repeated failures or situations beyond their control eventually stop trying to change their circumstances, even when new opportunities arise. In his most famous experiments, Seligman found that when dogs were subjected to electric shocks, they couldn't escape. They eventually just lay down and whimpered, accepting their fate. Later, even when the conditions changed and escape became possible, they didn't try. They had learned to be helpless. The same pattern shows up in humans who have experienced persistent failure or trauma. They stop believing that anything they do will make a difference. When we face inescapable shock or failure, Seligman explained, we learn that nothing we do matters. And this lesson, once learned, is so powerful that it generalizes to new situations where control is actually possible. This is exactly what could have happened to Machiavelli. After such a devastating fall from power, being tortured and exiled, watching everything he valued disappear, he could have easily concluded that his life was over, that nothing he could do would ever matter again. Most people would have sunk into depression and obscurity, convinced of their own powerlessness. But here's where the story gets interesting. Machiavelli didn't respond that way at all. In a famous letter to his friend Francesco Vittori, he described his daily routine in exile. When evening comes, I return home and enter my study. At the door, I take off my everyday clothes covered in mud and dirt and put on the garments of court. And for 4 hours, I feel no boredom. I forget all my troubles. I do not fear poverty, and I am not terrified by death. During these evening hours, Machiavelli would read ancient texts and write his observations about power, politics, and human nature. Observations that would eventually form The Prince and his other works. Think about that for a moment. Despite losing everything externally, Machiavelli found a way to reclaim his sense of agency and purpose. He refused to accept that his influence was over just because his official position was gone. This is precisely what Seligman would later identify as the opposite of learned helplessness, learned optimism. It's the ability to see setbacks as temporary and specific, rather than permanent and all-encompassing. It's the belief that even when you can't control your circumstances, you can control how you respond to them. Seligman found that people who overcome adversity tend to explain negative events to themselves in 3 specific ways. They see problems as temporary, not permanent. This bad situation will end. Specific, not universal. This affects one area of my life, not everything. And external or circumstantial, not entirely personal. This happened due to various factors, not just because of who I am. Looking at Machiavelli's response to exile, we can see all 3 patterns. He didn't see his fall as permanent. He found new ways to exercise influence. He didn't let his political disgrace contaminate every aspect of his identity. He reinvented himself as a writer and thinker. And he recognized that his downfall was largely due to political circumstances beyond his control, not a reflection of his personal worth. This brings us to one of Machiavelli's core concepts, virtù. Though often translated simply as virtue in Machiavelli's writing, Virtù meant something much more complex than just moral goodness. It referred to a kind of practical effectiveness, the ability to respond to changing circumstances, to adapt, to see opportunities where others see only obstacles, and to act decisively when necessary. "One must be a fox to recognize traps," he wrote, "and a lion to frighten wolves." In other words, success requires both cleverness and strength, flexibility and firmness, depending on what the situation demands. What's fascinating is how closely Machiavelli's concept of virtù aligns with what modern psychologists like Seligman identify as resilience and psychological flexibility. Both involve seeing reality clearly, even when it's harsh, adapting to changing circumstances rather than clinging to how things should be, and maintaining a sense of agency even when external control is limited. The parallels are striking. Machiavelli developed these ideas through personal experience and observation in the brutal political landscape of Renaissance Italy. Seligman arrived at similar conclusions through careful scientific experimentation centuries later. Different paths, similar destination. So how exactly did Machiavelli apply these principles to overcome his own learned helplessness after exile? His approach offers valuable lessons for anyone facing adversity. First, he created distance between himself and his suffering. Notice how, in his letter, Machiavelli describes taking off his mud-covered farm clothes and putting on his formal attire before entering his study. This wasn't just a change of wardrobe, it was a psychological ritual that helped him step out of his immediate circumstances and connect with something larger. He refused to let his current situation define him completely. When we're drowning in adversity, gaining this kind of psychological distance can be transformative. It might mean physically changing your environment, engaging in a different activity, or simply reminding yourself that this is just one chapter of my story, not the whole book. Second, Machiavelli focused intensely on what he could control, not what he couldn't. He couldn't change Florentine politics or end his exile, but he could control how he spent his evenings, what he read, and what he wrote. By concentrating his energy on these areas of influence, he gradually expanded his impact far beyond what would have seemed possible from his position of exile. This principle appears repeatedly in resilience research. Those who recover best from setbacks tend to quickly identify what aspects of their situation they can influence, however small, and direct their attention there rather than ruminating on all the factors beyond their control. Third, Machiavelli's approach to power itself transformed. Before his fall, his power came from his official position and connections. After exile, he discovered a different kind of power, the power of insight, of seeing through illusions, of understanding how things really work beneath the surface of politics and human relations. "Everyone sees what you appear to be," he wrote. "Few experience what you really are." This recognition that appearances often mask reality became central to his political philosophy, and it started with his own experience of having the trappings of power stripped away, forcing him to identify more fundamental sources of influence. This shift from external to internal sources of power is critical for overcoming learned helplessness. When we base our sense of control entirely on external factors, job titles, wealth, others' approval, we remain vulnerable to collapse when those factors change. Developing internal sources of power, knowledge, skills, character strengths, self-awareness, creates a more resilient foundation. But Machiavelli's greatest triumph over helplessness may have been his ability to find meaning in his suffering. His exile wasn't just something to endure. It became the very condition that enabled his greatest work. Without that forced removal from political life, would he have gained the perspective necessary to write The Prince? Would he have had the time or motivation to develop his revolutionary political insights? As he wrote to Vittori, I have found men who desire to honor me so much and love me that they say I would do better to leave politics altogether and turn to writing, that if I waited until I was called back to government service, I could wait a long time. But if I wrote something substantial, I would bring myself glory. This ability to derive meaning from suffering, to see how hardship might serve some greater purpose, is what psychologist Viktor Frankl would later identify as one of the most powerful antidotes to despair. Machiavelli didn't just survive his exile. He found a way to make it meaningful, to transform it into the crucible for his greatest contributions. So how can we apply these insights from Machiavelli and Seligman to overcome our own experiences of helplessness and develop a resilient power mindset? Let's look at some practical strategies. First, become aware of your explanatory style, how you habitually explain negative events to yourself. When something goes wrong, do you automatically think it's permanent, pervasive, and entirely your fault? Catching these patterns is the first step to changing them. Seligman found that even brief interventions that help people recognize and challenge pessimistic explanations can significantly reduce feelings of helplessness. For example, if you lose a job, the helpless response might be, "I'll never find work again," permanent. "I'm a complete failure at everything," pervasive. "It's all because I'm fundamentally incompetent," personal. A more resilient response acknowledges reality without catastrophizing. "This is a difficult setback, temporary, though my skills in other areas remain valuable," specific. "And while I made some mistakes, market conditions and company politics also played a role," balanced attribution. Second, develop Machiavellian virtue, not in the commonly misunderstood sense of being unethical, but in terms of adaptability and practical effectiveness. This means seeing reality clearly, without illusions or wishful thinking, adapting your approach based on circumstances rather than rigidly following one method, developing multiple skills and ways of exerting influence, and building a repertoire of responses rather than reacting the same way to every challenge. In today's rapidly changing world, this kind of flexibility is even more valuable than it was in Machiavelli's time. Those who can adapt quickly to new circumstances, technological changes, economic shifts, or personal setbacks, maintain their power and effectiveness where others might fall into helplessness. Third, cultivate psychological distance from immediate circumstances. Machiavelli created this through his evening ritual of changing clothes and entering his study. We might find it through meditation, creative pursuits, physical exercise, or meaningful connections with others. Anything that helps us step back from our immediate problems and see them in a larger context. When Machiavelli lost his external position, he still had his mind, his observations, his understanding of human nature and politics. Those internal resources became his new foundation. Similarly, we can develop resources that aren't easily taken away. Knowledge, skills, character strengths, meaningful relationships, and self-awareness. This doesn't mean ignoring external forms of power and influence, which clearly matter in the real world. But it does mean creating a more balanced portfolio of resources so that your sense of agency doesn't collapse when external circumstances change. Fifth, search for meaning in adversity. This doesn't mean pretending that suffering is good or that injustice is acceptable. Rather, it means asking, given that this difficult thing has happened, how might I use it as an opportunity for growth, learning, or contribution? Machiavelli's exile became the condition for his greatest work. What might your current challenges make possible? Research consistently shows that people who can find meaning in difficult experiences, not just explaining why something happened, but identifying how it connects to something larger than themselves, recover more effectively from trauma and setbacks. Finally, rebuild reputation strategically after failure. Machiavelli never fully returned to political office, but through his writings, he rebuilt a different kind of reputation that has far outlasted the political figures of his day. When facing reputational damage, the Machiavellian approach isn't to deny reality or make excuses, but to clearly assess the situation and identify the most effective path forward. This might mean demonstrating changed behavior over time, rather than just making promises. Finding new arenas where your strengths can shine, as Machiavelli did with writing. Focusing on building trust with specific key relationships, rather than trying to rehabilitate your image with everyone at once. And being patient, recognizing that reputation, once damaged, takes time to rebuild. What makes the connection between Machiavelli and Seligman so powerful is that it bridges the theoretical and the practical, the historical and the contemporary. Machiavelli developed his insights through lived experience in an intensely competitive political environment. Seligman validated similar principles through rigorous scientific methods. Together, they offer a more complete picture of how humans can overcome helplessness and reclaim their power. The world is full of forces that can make us feel powerless. Economic uncertainty, political turmoil, personal setbacks, and systemic barriers. These realities shouldn't be dismissed or minimized, but neither should they be allowed to convince us that nothing we do matters, that we have no agency, no capacity to influence our circumstances or create meaning from difficulty. As Machiavelli wrote, "Where the willingness is great, the difficulties cannot be great." He didn't choose to be exiled, but he did choose how to respond to exile. And that choice transformed him from a disgraced politician into one of history's most influential thinkers, someone whose ideas about power, politics, and human nature continue to shape our world 5 centuries later. So the next time you face a setback that makes you feel powerless, whether it's losing a job, facing rejection, or encountering obstacles that seem insurmountable, remember Machiavelli in his exile. Remember that feeling helpless doesn't mean you are helpless. Remember that even in the darkest circumstances, you have choices about how to respond. And those choices, accumulated over time, can lead to forms of power and influence you might not yet be able to imagine. After all, who would have predicted that a disgraced, exiled politician would become one of history's most enduring voices on the nature of power itself? Perhaps your current setback, like Machiavelli's, isn't the end of your story, but rather the beginning of a more powerful chapter. The connection between Machiavelli and Seligman reminds us that human psychology hasn't fundamentally changed across the centuries. The same patterns of thought and behavior that enabled Machiavelli to overcome learned helplessness in Renaissance Italy can work for us today. Whether you're facing career setbacks, relationship challenges, health issues, or any other form of adversity, the principles remain the same. Maintain perspective, focus on what you can control, develop internal sources of power, find meaning in difficulty, and be strategic about rebuilding. What's particularly powerful about this historical psychological connection is how it validates these principles from multiple angles. We're not just relying on modern psychological research, though Seligman's findings are robust and well documented. We're not just drawing lessons from a historical figure, though Machiavelli's story is compelling. We're seeing how these principles of resilience and agency emerge independently in different contexts, suggesting that they tap into something fundamental about human nature and our relationship with adversity. This doesn't mean the path from helplessness to power is easy or straightforward. Machiavelli still suffered in exile. He still faced poverty and isolation. He still yearned to return to political life. Overcoming learned helplessness doesn't mean you won't experience pain or that you'll immediately achieve all your goals. What it means is that you maintain your capacity to act, to influence outcomes, to create meaning, even when circumstances are far from ideal. And that capacity, that sense of agency amid difficulty, may be one of the most important determinants of whether adversity destroys you or transforms you. As Seligman's research has shown, it's not the adversity itself that predicts outcomes like depression, achievement, or health. It's how people interpret and respond to that adversity. The story you tell yourself about what's happening and what it means shapes both your immediate reactions and your long-term trajectory. Machiavelli could have told himself a story of victimhood and finality. My enemies have won, my career is over, my life is ruined. Many would have. Instead, he crafted a different narrative. Though I'm physically exiled, my mind remains free. Though I've lost one form of influence, I can develop another. Though my present is constrained, I can still shape the future. That narrative wasn't just comforting, it was generative. It opened possibilities that the victim narrative would have closed off. In our own lives, we constantly face this same narrative choice. When setbacks occur, do we craft stories of helplessness or stories of possibility? Do we focus on what's been lost or what might still be created? Do we define ourselves by our circumstances or by our responses to them? The answers to these questions don't just reflect our mindset, they help create it. This is where Machiavelli's concept of virtue and Seligman's work on learned optimism truly converge. Both recognize that while we can't control everything that happens to us, we maintain significant power over how we interpret and respond to events. And that interpretive power, the ability to see clearly, adapt flexibly, and act effectively even in difficult circumstances, is ultimately what determines whether we succumb to helplessness or develop increasing resilience. That's the lasting legacy of both Machiavelli and Seligman. The recognition that power isn't just something conferred by external position or circumstance. True power includes the capacity to remain the author of your own story, even when that story takes unexpected and challenging turns. It's the ability to find opportunity in difficulty, to create meaning in suffering, and to maintain agency in circumstances that tempt you toward helplessness. In the end, perhaps that's the most Machiavellian insight of all. That power doesn't just exist in the world of politics and position, but in the human capacity to overcome circumstance through perspective, adaptation, and determined action. 500 years before psychologists documented the dynamics of learned helplessness and learned optimism, Machiavelli was living these principles, transforming exile into opportunity, disgrace into legacy, and limitation into a different kind of freedom. His example, illuminated by Seligman's research, offers us not just historical interest, but practical wisdom for navigating our own challenging circumstances. We may not all write world-changing books during our periods of adversity, but we can all cultivate the mindset that makes meaningful response possible. And in doing so, we reclaim power in the most fundamental sense, not the power to control everything that happens to us, but the power to shape what it means and what happens next. Why do some people succeed while others fail? Is it talent, intelligence, luck? For centuries, we've been captivated by this question. Today, we're going to explore a surprising connection between Niccolò Machiavelli, the controversial Renaissance political philosopher, and groundbreaking research by psychologist Angela Duckworth. Their combined wisdom reveals something extraordinary. The true secret to exceptional achievement isn't natural ability, it's grit. Imagine this: you've dedicated your entire professional life to serving your city. You've risen through the ranks, handled delicate diplomatic missions across Europe, built a reputation as a shrewd political operator. Then suddenly, overnight, everything is ripped away. Your career, gone. Your reputation, destroyed. Your future, uncertain. You're even imprisoned and tortured. Most people would never recover from such a devastating blow. But Niccolò Machiavelli wasn't most people. When the Medici family overthrew the Florentine Republic in 1512, Machiavelli didn't just lose his prestigious position as second chancellor and secretary to the Council of Ten for War. He lost his identity, his purpose, his entire way of life. After being tortured on suspicion of conspiracy, he was exiled to his small property outside Florence, forced into political irrelevance after 14 years of public service. For a man whose entire life had revolved around politics and power, this should have been the end. A lesser person would have surrendered to despair or bitterness. Instead, Machiavelli did something remarkable. He reinvented himself. Barred from the corridors of power, he turned to writing about power. In his small country home, removed from the political stage he loved, he produced works that would influence political thought for the next 500 years. This extraordinary resilience, this ability to persist despite crushing setbacks, is what psychologist Angela Duckworth calls grit. In her groundbreaking research, Duckworth defined grit as passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. It's about having the endurance to work hard not just for weeks or months, but for years, maintaining interest and effort despite failure, adversity, and plateaus in progress. What's remarkable is how Duckworth's modern scientific findings align perfectly with Machiavelli's lived experience 5 centuries earlier. Both suggest that what matters most isn't raw talent, intelligence, or luck. It's the capacity to persist when everything is telling you to quit. Let's look more closely at Machiavelli's grit in action. After his fall from power, he could have retreated into a quiet life of obscurity. Instead, he wrote in a letter to his friend Francesco Vittori, "When evening comes, I return home and enter my study. I enter the ancient courts of ancient men, where, received by them with affection, I feed on that food which is mine alone and which I was born for." Every evening, despite the humiliation of his exile, Machiavelli would change from his muddy farm clothes into formal attire and immerse himself in the classics, conversing in his mind with the great thinkers of antiquity. Then he would write. This wasn't just a hobby or distraction. It was a deliberate effort to remain engaged with political thought when he could no longer participate in political action. The result? The Prince, Discourses on Livy, The Art of War, and other works that would secure his place as one of history's most influential political philosophers. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is that Machiavelli wrote The Prince, perhaps the most famous political treatise of all time, hoping it would impress the very Medici rulers who had destroyed his career. This persistent effort in the face of enormous obstacles exemplifies what Duckworth's research has consistently shown, that grit outperforms talent in predicting long-term success. As she puts it, our potential is one thing, what we do with it is quite another. Duckworth's studies across diverse fields, from West Point military cadets to national spelling bee contestants, from sales professionals to teachers in challenging schools, all point to the same conclusion. It's not the most naturally gifted who succeed, but rather those who stay the course when others give up. For Machiavelli, this meant continuing to think about politics and power even when barred from practicing them. It meant writing The Prince without any guarantee that anyone would read it, let alone that it would restore his career. It meant persisting in his intellectual work for years, through poverty and isolation, driven by an unwavering passion for understanding political reality. This kind of sustained passion is the first component of grit that Duckworth identifies. It's not just momentary enthusiasm or fleeting interest. It's a consistent commitment to something you find deeply meaningful. For Machiavelli, that was understanding and explaining the mechanics of political power. The second component of grit is perseverance, the determination to overcome obstacles, setbacks, and failures. Machiavelli's life was full of these. Beyond his dramatic fall from power, there were numerous smaller disappointments. The Medici rulers didn't immediately embrace him or his work. The prince didn't win him a return to political office. His plays and other literary works received mixed receptions, yet he continued writing, thinking, and creating. As he said in The Prince itself, fortune at times being the enemy of enterprises, sometimes delays, sometimes anticipates, sometimes diminishes, sometimes increases one's strength. In these cases, one must not give up, but wait for time and opportunity. This patience, this willingness to wait for time and opportunity, is precisely what Duckworth's research identifies as a hallmark of gritty individuals. They understand that success rarely comes quickly or easily. They're prepared for the long haul. Machiavelli experienced this firsthand. The Prince wasn't published until 1532, 5 years after his death. He never witnessed its full impact or knew it would become one of the most influential political works ever written. His persistence wasn't rewarded with immediate success, but with enduring legacy. So what can we learn from this convergence of Renaissance wisdom and modern psychology? How can we develop the kind of grit that both Machiavelli exemplified and Duckworth studies? First, we need to understand that grit isn't a fixed trait. It can be cultivated. Duckworth's research shows that grit tends to increase with age, suggesting it's something we can develop through experience and practice. Machiavelli himself wasn't born with extraordinary resilience. He built it through decades of navigating the treacherous waters of Renaissance politics, learning from failures and adapting to changing circumstances. One key strategy for developing grit is what Duckworth calls deliberate practice, the focused, systematic effort to improve specific aspects of your performance. This isn't just working hard, it's working smart, targeting weaknesses and constantly pushing beyond your comfort zone. Machiavelli exemplified this approach in his writing. After years as a governmental scribe and diplomat, he could have simply recorded his observations and experiences. Instead, he pushed himself to develop a new, incisive style of political analysis. He studied ancient texts not just to admire them, but to extract practical lessons for contemporary problems. He invented a new genre of political writing, unsentimental, pragmatic, focused on what is rather than what should be. This deliberate approach to mastery, constantly refining skills, seeking feedback, and pushing boundaries, builds not just ability, but the resilience to persist when progress is slow or setbacks occur. It creates what Duckworth calls a growth mindset, the belief that abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. Another crucial element of developing grit is finding or creating purpose in your work. Duckworth's research shows that gritty people don't just pursue goals for personal gain. They connect their efforts to something larger than themselves. For Machiavelli, that larger purpose was clear. He wanted to understand and share the true nature of political power, not just for his own advancement, but to provide practical guidance for rulers and citizens alike. In the dedication of The Prince, Machiavelli wrote that he was offering the knowledge of the actions of great men, acquired through a long experience of modern events and a continuous study of ancient ones. This wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was his contribution to a better understanding of political reality, something he believed was sorely needed in the turbulent Italy of his time. This sense of purpose can sustain effort when external rewards are absent or delayed. Machiavelli continued writing not because he was receiving accolades or compensation, but because he believed in the importance of what he was doing. This intrinsic motivation is what Duckworth finds consistently in people with high levels of grit. A third strategy for building grit, particularly relevant in highly competitive environments, is developing what Duckworth calls a growth mindset. Well, this is the belief that our abilities aren't fixed traits, but can be developed through effort and learning. People with a growth mindset see challenges as opportunities to improve rather than threats to their self-image. Machiavelli demonstrated this mindset throughout his career and especially during his exile. Rather than seeing his political downfall as evidence of personal inadequacy, he viewed it as an opportunity to develop a different kind of contribution. When direct political action was no longer possible, he found a new way to exercise his talents and pursue his interests. This adaptability, this willingness to reconceive goals without abandoning underlying values, is characteristic of highly gritty individuals. They don't give up when one path is blocked. They find another route to what matters most to them. For leaders seeking to foster grit in themselves and others, Machiavelli offers some surprisingly modern insights. In The Prince, he emphasizes the importance of weathering adversity. A man who becomes prince with the help of the nobles maintains himself with more difficulty than one who becomes prince with the help of the people. For he finds himself prince with many around him who believe they are his equals. This observation highlights a truth Duckworth's research confirms. Grit often develops through challenge and adversity. Leaders who have faced and overcome significant obstacles typically develop greater resilience than those who've had an easy path to power. Machiavelli also understood the importance of aligning personal passion with practical action, another key component of grit. He advised princes to take such courses as might appear necessary to maintain his state, recognizing that effective leadership requires both passionate commitment to goals and practical adaptability in pursuing them. This balance of passion and pragmatism is exactly what Duckworth identifies in gritty individuals. They're deeply committed to their long-term objectives but flexible about the means of achieving them. They know when to persist with a strategy and when to pivot to a more promising approach. So how can we apply these insights to develop greater grit in our own lives, especially when facing daunting challenges? First, identify what truly matters to you, your core interests and values. Grit flourishes when aligned with authentic passion. Machiavelli never lost his fascination with politics and power, even when excluded from direct participation. This consistent interest fueled his persistence through years of exile and uncertainty. Second, practice what Duckworth calls deliberate optimism, a realistic hope based on agency rather than blind faith. Machiavelli never indulged in wishful thinking about his situation, but he maintained belief in his ability to contribute meaningfully despite his circumstances. As he wrote in The Prince, "Many have imagined republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in reality. For how we live is so far removed from how we ought to live, that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done will rather learn to bring about his own ruin than his preservation." See, this clear-eyed assessment of reality, combined with a determination to work within its constraints rather than surrender to them, characterizes both Machiavelli's approach and what Duckworth finds in exceptionally gritty individuals. Third, cultivate what both Machiavelli and Duckworth recognize as essential: the ability to delay gratification. Machiavelli worked for years on writing that brought him little immediate benefit. Similarly, Duckworth's research shows that gritty individuals excel at foregoing immediate pleasures in service of long-term goals. Practically speaking, this means focusing on process rather than just outcomes, finding satisfaction in the daily work that gradually accumulates into significant achievement. It means accepting that progress often comes slowly and setbacks are inevitable. And it means developing routines that sustain effort over time, as Machiavelli did with his evening ritual of reading and writing. Fourth, surround yourself with examples of grit. Machiavelli found inspiration in historical figures who demonstrated exceptional perseverance. Leaders like Cesare Borgia, who overcame significant obstacles in his quest to unify Romagna. Similarly, Duckworth recommends seeking out role models and mentors who exemplify the kind of persistent passion you aspire to develop. Finally, both Machiavelli and Duckworth emphasize the importance of correctly attributing failure. Machiavelli was clear-eyed about the role of fortune, what we might call luck or circumstance, in human affairs, but he never used it as an excuse for inaction. Fortune is the arbiter of half our actions, but she leaves the other half, or perhaps a little less, to be controlled by us. This balanced view, recognizing external factors while maintaining belief in personal agency, is precisely what Duckworth finds in individuals with high grit. They don't deny the reality of bad luck or unfair circumstances, but they focus their attention on what they can control. When we bring together Machiavelli's lived experience and Duckworth's research, we see a powerful validation of grit across centuries and contexts. The qualities that allowed a disgraced political figure in Renaissance Italy to create an enduring intellectual legacy are the same qualities that predict success in modern contexts, from education to business to the military. This timeless relevance suggests something fundamental about human achievement. Natural talent matters, certainly. Intelligence helps. Luck plays a role. But what ultimately determines who succeeds and who fails, who overcomes adversity and who surrenders to it, is the persistent pursuit of meaningful goals, the quality we now call grit. Machiavelli captured this truth in a letter written during his exile. I am not unaware that fortune is a woman, and the more she is held down, the more she kicks up a fuss. However, she allows herself to be ruled by those who deal more coldly with her than by those who behave impetuously. In modern terms, this suggests exactly what Duckworth's research confirms, that consistent, determined effort over time, even when progress is slow and setbacks are frequent, ultimately proves more powerful than sporadic brilliance or momentary inspiration. So the next time you face a significant challenge or setback, remember Machiavelli in his small country house, changing from his muddy clothes into formal attire each evening to commune with great minds and create work that would long outlive him. Remember that talent is just the starting point, and that persistence, gritty, determined, passionate persistence, is what transforms potential into achievement. As Duckworth puts it, enthusiasm is common, endurance is rare. Machiavelli showed uncommon endurance in the face of devastating circumstances. His example, illuminated by Duckworth's research, offers a powerful lesson for anyone facing adversity, that with sufficient grit, today's setbacks can become tomorrow's greatest contributions. Whether you're building a career, pursuing education, leading an organization, or simply trying to overcome personal challenges, the combined wisdom of Machiavelli and Duckworth offers a clear message. Believe in the power of persistent passion. Trust in the process, focus on what you can control, and never underestimate what determined effort can achieve over time. After all, as Machiavelli himself might remind us, history is ultimately made not by those with the most natural advantages, but by those with the determination to persist when others surrender, to adapt when circumstances change, and to find opportunity even in the darkest moments of adversity. What if the chaos and uncertainty you fear could actually make you stronger? What if the very volatility that most people spend their lives avoiding is actually the secret ingredient to extraordinary success? This isn't just a comforting thought, it's a profound insight that connects the political philosophy of Renaissance Italy with cutting-edge thinking about risk and uncertainty. Today, we're exploring the fascinating connection between Niccolò Machiavelli, the 16th century political philosopher, and Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the modern risk analyst and author of Antifragile. Though separated by 5 centuries, these two thinkers arrived at remarkably similar conclusions about how to thrive in an unpredictable world. Imagine living in Renaissance Italy, a world of constant political upheaval, where city-states warred with each other, powerful families schemed for dominance, and alliances shifted overnight. This was Machiavelli's reality, a landscape where disaster could strike without warning and security was always temporary. In this volatile environment, Machiavelli developed a sophisticated understanding of what he called fortuna, the unpredictable force of chance and circumstance that shapes human affairs. Fortune, Machiavelli wrote, is the arbiter of half our actions, but she leaves the other half, or perhaps a little less, to be controlled by us. This wasn't just an abstract observation, it was a lived reality for him. One day he was a respected diplomat and government official in Florence. The next he was arrested, tortured, and exiled when the Medici family seized power in 1512. Most people would have been broken by such a devastating reversal of fortune. Machiavelli instead responded by writing The Prince, one of the most influential political treatises in history. He didn't just survive adversity, he derived his greatest insights from it, creating work that would outlast the very powers that had cast him aside. Fast forward to our own turbulent times where financial markets crash overnight. Industries are disrupted by new technologies, pandemics emerge without warning, and political landscapes transform rapidly. Enter Nassim Nicholas Taleb, a former trader turned philosopher who has developed a revolutionary concept called anti-fragility. Some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors, Taleb writes. While fragile things break under pressure and resilient things resist damage, anti-fragile systems actually get stronger when stressed. This isn't just about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward, becoming better because of disorder rather than despite it. The connection between Machiavelli's fortuna and Taleb's anti-fragility reveals something profound about success in uncertain times. Both thinkers recognize that volatility isn't just inevitable, it can be valuable. Those who understand this counterintuitive truth gain an extraordinary advantage over those who futilely seek perfect stability. Machiavelli captured this insight in one of his most famous metaphors. He compared fortune to one of those raging rivers which, when they become enraged, flood the plains, ruin trees and buildings, move earth from one place and deposit it in another. Many people respond by trying to build perfect defenses against such unpredictable floods, a strategy doomed to failure when the river's power exceeds their preparations. The wiser approach, Machiavelli suggests, is to prepare in times of calm for the inevitable floods to come. This does not mean that men, when times are quiet, cannot take precautions with dikes and dams, so that when the waters rise, either they go in a canal or their assault is not so unrestrained and destructive. This is remarkably similar to Taleb's central argument about anti-fragility. Rather than trying to predict exactly when disasters will strike, an impossible task, we should build systems that can withstand and even benefit from unexpected shocks. In Taleb's words, we should be more concerned with the consequences of an event than its probability, a principle he calls the Lucretius problem, after the Roman philosopher who noted that Unexpected events seem more threatening precisely because they're unexpected. Both Machiavelli and Taleb reject the notion that we can achieve perfect security through prediction and control. Instead, they advocate preparing for uncertainty itself. As Machiavelli puts it, a wise prince must build on foundations that are his own and not on those of others. This philosophical alignment becomes even more interesting when we look at how both thinkers apply their insights to practical matters. Machiavelli advises princes to be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves, to combine cunning awareness of hidden dangers with the strength to confront obvious threats. This dual approach acknowledges both the predictable and unpredictable aspects of risk. Similarly, Taleb recommends a barbell strategy of combining extremely safe positions with small exposures to high-risk, high-reward possibilities. This creates an asymmetry where potential losses are limited while potential gains are unlimited, preparing for both the expected and the unexpected. But the most striking parallel between these thinkers is their shared understanding that systems and individuals can actually grow stronger through exposure to stressors, as long as those stressors aren't overwhelming. Machiavelli witnessed this phenomenon throughout history. The Roman Republic, he observed, grew stronger through its conflicts with Carthage and other adversaries. These challenges forced Rome to develop more robust military and political institutions, until the stresses became too great and the Republic collapsed. Similarly, he noted how certain leaders emerged stronger from crises that would have destroyed less capable individuals. Taleb formalizes this observation with his concept of antifragility. He points to biological examples like muscles, which grow stronger when stressed through exercise, up to a point, and immune systems, which develop resistance through exposure to germs. He extends this principle to economic systems, political structures, and even personal development. Wind extinguishes a candle and energizes fire, Taleb writes. Likewise with randomness, uncertainty, chaos. You want to use them, not hide from them. You want to be the fire and wish for the wind. This perspective transforms how we see adversity. Problems, setbacks, and challenges aren't just obstacles to overcome. They're opportunities to develop strengths that can't be developed any other way. The person or system that has never been tested has hidden vulnerabilities. The person or system that has survived multiple stresses has proven durability. So how can we apply these insights to build anti-fragile careers, organizations, and lives? Let's explore some strategies that emerge from both Machiavelli's and Taleb's work. First, embrace optionality. Machiavelli understood that rigid commitment to a single strategy was dangerous in a volatile world. He advised leaders to maintain flexibility, to adapt their approaches as circumstances changed. The man who adapts his policy to the times prospers, he wrote, and likewise the man whose policy clashes with the demands of the times does not. Taleb echoes this with his emphasis on optionality, having multiple possible paths forward rather than committing entirely to one. This might mean developing diverse skills rather than specializing too narrowly, maintaining financial reserves that allow you to take advantage of unexpected opportunities, or positioning yourself so you can benefit from positive surprises while limiting your exposure to negative ones. In practice, this could mean pursuing a career that offers transferable skills, maintaining side projects that could grow into alternatives if your main path is blocked, or structuring your finances so you have both security and potential for gain through calculated risks. Second, seek out appropriate stressors. Machiavelli noted that the most effective leaders in states were those that had overcome significant challenges. Easy success bred complacency. Difficulty bred capability, assuming the challenges weren't overwhelming. Taleb calls this hormesis, the phenomenon where a small dose of a stressor triggers beneficial adaptations. In your career, this might mean voluntarily taking on challenges that stretch your abilities, exposing yourself to constructive criticism, or testing your ideas in small ways before committing completely. For organizations, it could mean running stress tests, encouraging controlled experimentation, or deliberately questioning successful strategies to uncover hidden weaknesses. The key is to distinguish between harmful stressors that might break you and beneficial stressors that trigger growth. As Taleb puts it, a complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that worked. Third, practice strategic redundancy. Machiavelli lived in a world where political fortunes could change overnight, where allies became enemies and security could vanish in an instant. He understood the value of backup plans and multiple sources of support. Taleb formalizes this with his discussion of redundancy, having duplicative systems or capabilities that seem inefficient in stable times but become invaluable during crises. In nature, we have two kidneys when one would suffice. In traditional societies, extended family networks provide support when primary systems fail. Applied to modern life, this might mean maintaining diverse professional networks rather than relying on a single employer or industry, developing multiple streams of income, or ensuring you have both digital and analog versions of critical information. For businesses, it could mean maintaining some slack in supply chains, cross-training employees, or maintaining physical capabilities as backups to digital systems. Fourth, develop a practical sense of risk and opportunity. Both Machiavelli and Taleb are deeply skeptical of theoretical models that fail to account for real-world complexity. Machiavelli criticized political philosophers who described imaginary republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in reality. Taleb similarly rejects economic and risk models that assume normal distributions of outcomes when reality features far more extreme events than such models predict. Instead, both thinkers advocate developing intuition based on historical examples and personal experience. Machiavelli filled The Prince with historical case studies, drawing practical lessons from the successes and failures of real leaders. Taleb emphasizes the importance of skin in the game, having personal exposure to the consequences of decisions, which forces more realistic risk assessment. To apply this approach, study history in your field, paying special attention to failures and how they occurred. Look for patterns in your own experience, especially cases where conventional wisdom led to unexpected problems. Develop the habit of asking not just, "What do I expect to happen?" but "What will I do if something completely different happens instead?" Fifth, maintain appropriate skepticism toward experts and forecasts. Machiavelli witnessed firsthand how the most confident predictions by political leaders often proved dramatically wrong. He developed a healthy skepticism toward those who claimed to know exactly what would happen next in the complex world of Italian politics. Taleb has formalized this skepticism with his critique of expert prediction, noting that forecasters in complex domains, economics, politics, social trends, perform barely better than chance, yet remain absurdly confident in their predictions. The problem with experts, he writes, is that they do not know what they do not know. This doesn't mean rejecting all expert knowledge. Both Machiavelli and Taleb deeply respect expertise in certain domains, but it does mean recognizing the limits of prediction in complex systems and maintaining independence of thought. When everyone confidently agrees about what will happen next, that's precisely when you should consider alternative possibilities. For practical application, consider maintaining a decision journal where you record not just what you decide, but your reasoning and expectations. Reviewing this periodically helps you identify patterns in your thinking and areas where your predictions systematically miss the mark. Sixth, recognize that anti-fragility often requires accepting small, frequent losses to avoid catastrophic ones. Machiavelli observed that wise leaders sometimes accept minor setbacks rather than risking everything on a single, decisive confrontation. A wise prince ought to follow such courses that his citizens always and in every sort of circumstance have need of his government, and then they will always be faithful to him. Taleb emphasizes this principle with his discussion of how natural systems distribute risk. Forest fires, when suppressed completely, eventually lead to massive, uncontrollable conflagrations as fuel builds up. Small, regular fires, though destructive in the moment, prevent this catastrophic scenario. In modern life, this might mean accepting regular small failures as the price of learning and adaptation. Let projects fail early when the stakes are low. Encourage open discussion of mistakes in your team or organization. Welcome modest volatility in financial markets, rather than policies that create artificial stability followed by massive crashes. Finally, both Machiavelli and Taleb emphasize the importance of asymmetric positioning, arrangements where potential losses are limited, but potential gains are unlimited. Machiavelli advised princes to structure alliances so they had more to gain than lose from conflicts. Taleb recommends financial strategies where the worst case is a small defined loss, but the best case is an open-ended gain. To apply this principle, look for opportunities where a small investment of time, money, or effort could yield disproportionate returns if things go well, but won't be catastrophic if they don't. This might mean pursuing moonshot projects alongside more conventional work, investing small amounts in potentially revolutionary technologies, or structuring business arrangements so fixed costs are minimized while growth potential is maximized. Through these strategies, we can move from fragility to anti-fragility, from being damaged by volatility to actually benefiting from it. But this isn't just about practical techniques, it's about a fundamental shift in mindset. Most people see uncertainty as the enemy. They long for a world of perfect predictability where good decisions reliably lead to good outcomes and risks can be precisely calculated. This mindset leads to fragility as they optimize their lives and organizations for a specific vision of the future that rarely arrives exactly as expected. The anti-fragile mindset embraces uncertainty as inevitable and potentially beneficial. It recognizes that perfect prediction is impossible, that some of the best opportunities come from unexpected directions, and that capabilities often emerge from challenges. This mindset leads to systems that can absorb shocks, adapt to changing circumstances, and even grow stronger through exposure to stressors. Machiavelli captured this mindset in his famous metaphor comparing fortune to a woman. Fortune is a woman, and if you wish to keep her under, it is necessary to beat and ill-use her, and it is seen that she allows herself to be mastered by the adventurous rather than by those who go to work more coldly. While the gendered language reflects his time, the core insight remains powerful. Those who approach uncertainty with bold adaptability rather than timid calculation often fare better. Fortune favors not just the bold, but the anti-fragile, those who position themselves to benefit from the very volatility that others fear. Taleb expresses a similar sentiment in more modern terms. We have been fragilizing the economy, our health, political life, education, almost everything, by suppressing randomness and volatility. Just preparation for uncertainty, building strength through appropriate exposure to stress, maintaining flexibility in the face of changing circumstances, and positioning yourself to benefit from the unexpected. In our increasingly unpredictable world, this centuries-spanning wisdom offers a powerful alternative to both naive optimism and defeatist pessimism. It's not about predicting the future correctly. It's about building yourself and your systems to thrive, regardless of what the future brings. Whether you're developing your career, building an organization, or simply trying to live well in turbulent times, the combined insights of Machiavelli and Taleb offer a compelling vision. Embrace uncertainty, seek appropriate challenges, maintain flexibility, limit downside exposure while maximizing upside potential, and remember that what doesn't kill you often really does make you stronger, not just metaphorically but literally. As Machiavelli himself might say, the true art of navigating fortune is not to avoid its storms, but to build a vessel that becomes more seaworthy with each tempest it weathers. Or, as Taleb would put it, don't just aim to survive the unexpected, position yourself to benefit from it. Don't be merely resilient, be anti-fragile. In a world obsessed with prediction and control, this ancient yet modern wisdom offers a radical alternative. Stop trying to forecast the unforecastable and start building systems that gain from disorder. The future belongs not to those who can predict it best, but to those who can adapt to it most effectively, and perhaps even harness its chaos to fuel their own growth and success. After all, as both Machiavelli and Taleb would agree, it's not about controlling fortune's river, it's about building a mill that turns its unpredictable flows into energy, transforming the very volatility that frightens others